Matthew, thank you very much for being here, for making your valuable time available to have this conversation and exchange of view and explorations. I say very consciously valuable time because I think for the people that know your work, are probably all agree on the brilliance of that and the diligence and the level of detail in which you manage to research phenomena and historical phenomena, current day phenomena. It's very impressive. So I'm very grateful to have this conversation with you, Matthew. So welcome. First of all.
Thank you, Leon. I've been looking forward to this chat for since we met in Switzerland. Actually, it was a great. We had some great philosophical discourse, and when you proposed a little official recording of a Zoom session, I was very much looking forward to that. So it's been a couple of months now, and I'm happy we're finally doing this.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a very interesting conference where we met there in Basel, Switzerland, in March. That was a great pleasure. Also, that was also, I think, a conference focused on how do we look at the human being, right? What is this human creature, this creature of spirit? This that element. And I think that is one element thing where I very much appreciate your work, and also some of the interviews and sessions that I follow. Is I think you do a lot of very sound research on facts and historical happenings and so on, but and to put things in a different perspective, so it very opens up for people that follow that to have different ways of thinking about certain subjects and to explore this thinking, which is very important. But I feel that you also in how you talk and the emphasis you make is you try to focus on promote a certain way of looking at the human being, an image, a paradigm for looking at life and about human life and about the universe, which is very much a pro-life vision, a creature of spirit. And I think that is very much an added value of your work, which adds to the uniqueness, and so I appreciate that. So in that sense, I thought it was very interesting to have this conversation with you. Do you agree? Do you recognize this?
Yeah, I try, and I'm happy that you zero in on that emphasis that I try to put in my mind and heart when I try to analyze either world events, current events, or history. Which are two sides of the exact same process. Obviously, I think it's a mistake that people often make due to certain problems in academia that tend to dichotomize or create compartments of current events as something that operates under a different framework than the rules we apply to analyzing our past historic events, which is often treated as something different from the idea of the evolution of science, scientific thought, the application of scientific ideas in the form of new technologies, which is again treated as two different modes of analysis. The growth of technology, the idea of the moral and philosophical world that human beings live in and try to shape. This is again treated in another compartment of moral philosophy, or the arts. This is another thing which has been really dichotomized, as well as people are often told you're either right-brained or left-brained, and you have to sort of pick which one you're going to live by as you go into this world. Are you going to be a left-brained, logical person who doesn't get bothered so much by matters of the heart or the emotions, because those are for the artists, for the right-brained people who are feelers. They're not thinkers. They're not supposed to be contaminated by questions of matters of logic, which will only tyrannize the artistic expression and freedom to just be an artist. An artist should be free of any tyranny of reason, right? And the scientist should be free of any pollution of emotion. And I mean, it's insane. It's insane because all of these things are different facets of the same human condition. Ultimately trying to navigate through this universe that we were created into. And so why would we want to dichotomize ourselves into these different things? And so I do try to unite as much as I can,
Mhm.
um, with a few core principles that I think apply to any field you look at. And I do try to encourage people to entertain this same method, which I find it bears a lot of good edifying results in my research, you know, in my series of history books, as well as the work that I've published over the course of the past 10 years, first working with the Schiller Institute between 2006 and 2017, and then becoming more of an independent analyst after 2017. I do encourage people to do that. And one of the key invariants is the question of the sacred, that
Yeah.
there is a sacredness of human life,
Mm.
just like there's a sacredness of all life, but not all sacredness is necessarily created equal. And to say that will often offend people, because they'll say, oh, if you believe in a human centric approach to the universe or to nature, doesn't that mean that you think that you're better than everything else in the universe as a human? And
Yes.
doesn't that mean that you think that other animals and other are bad? Because if something is better, then that means that everything that it is better than must be worse and thus bad. And it's like, no, I don't think that just because there is qualitative hierarchies, you know, the cube is hierarchically, um it's higher up qualitatively than the flat plane. You know, like the simple area of a square
Mm.
is on a lower plane than the cube, and the line, which is simply one dimensional versus the two-dimensional square or the three-dimensional cube, the line is on a lower order than the square, or than the square.
Mm.
And you can prove that because you cannot, no matter how many lines that have zero width that you add to each other, you'll never be able to add all of these zeros up to get a surface. A surface has width, and a width is not the sum total of zeros, you know, lines. And same thing, you can't keep on layering squares on top of each other, hoping that you're going to get a cube. A cube is just of a higher order. Does that mean that the square is bad or that the line is bad? No, they're perfectly beautiful and good for what they are. But they're, you know, it's the same thing for monkeys. You know, you can keep on adding quantitative attributes to a monkey,
Yeah.
but and we're biologically very similar to other forms of chimpanzees that we might find in nature.
Mm.
But will that necessarily give you that qualitative um human that can do certain things with our mind conscience connection that's tied to free will that we don't seem to find in monkeys?
Mm.
No, I mean, these are metaphysical questions that I think people, they've been taught to not think about metaphysics in a serious way. And so they become very susceptible to this idea that we are just our material aspect. We're
Right.
just, you know, the bodies occupying space in time, you know, that is very similar to other animals. And then they start building their constructs and their theories of knowledge and their theories of human society or economy or anything
Mm.
around these unexamined assumptions that humans are just another form of pleasure seeking animal, desirous of you know, increasing our access to pleasure and sex and food, and decreasing our exposure to pain, which might be something that is an element on a mechanistic level, but it's not all we are. But then they build their whole construct and their theories of human society and how to organize us, and you know, around these false,
Yeah.
under examined definitions of what they're thinking about. And it doesn't involve the sacred. There's no space for
Yes.
questions of the sacredness of life within that world. So sorry for my rant, but that's just what I was inspired by when you when
Yes.
you introduced.
No, that sets the tone pretty nicely. So, indeed. So let me just say a little bit for where I'm coming from with the ideas.
Mm,
So, also for those who don't know. So my background, I have academic training in anthropology, yes, cultural
mm,
anthropology, and I was when I remember the time when I started to have to get to university. You know, I was already very much interested in this human being as a spiritual creature. Therefore, it's so obvious that the human being is a spiritual being, and you see this very much very much expressed and acknowledged in many rich traditions that the world has seen and has right now. And initially, I wanted to make that the object of my study, this human creature. Initially, I went into psychology because I thought, well, that is psychology. But I very quickly ran into the limitations there, where you already had this paradigm of, well, basically, you can only know something about something when you can measure it. Of course, this attempt to be a science, in that sense. And so anything about the human experience that you cannot really measure as such was not easily part of the field of study at that time in psychology. So I switched to anthropology because the task of the anthropologist is to study, human life and human experience as it manifests itself, and then clearly, the spiritual dimension of human being becomes part of your study, because this is part of the expressions of human life. And in terms of let's say regional orientation, as very often anthropologists choose, or what kind of region in the world are you focusing on? So I wanted to focus on Western culture, on Europe. I myself from Europe, right? Originally from the Netherlands, and I had this inspiration that I really wanted to be an anthropologist in my own society. I want to look at my own, world and culture from an anthropological perspective. And so I did that. And when you look at this aspect of a spiritual orientation, I like to call it also transcendental, to take it a little bit more out of the spiritual has a lot of associations connected to it. It's quite a universal throughout human cultures. It would seem that humans acknowledge that you are sharing in a wider whole, in a wider totality, that you are sharing in, that is part of living, and that it is very useful and good to have a certain degree of attunement to, right? The degree in which that what you call the sacred that is integrated in human living is a very universal aspect. But then in contemporary Western culture, this is quite absent, I think. Western culture is a little bit of a difficult term, I think. But I should also realize that I, of course, take very much the way I know it in terms of Europe as a reference. I think there still can be differences between North American continent and Canada, US, and Europe. Probably there's an overarching element, which is a Western culture. I don't know too much about that, actually. So, but it's certainly in the West, this has kind of disappeared, right? And so I wanted to at that time in university, I also wanted to make that transcendental way of living, that spiritual way of living. Also, I want to explore that and also make it the object of my study. So I was interested in what I called at that time, mysticism. Mysticism is also a difficult word. I think there's many languages where it would actually be driven more to an esoteric understanding of things, but I would more the mystic in the sense of this realization of the spiritual nature of human living, this direct experience of the sacred, I would say. And at that time, I met this man that for me kind of expressed this state. It was kind of a realized human being in my experience. You could say a mystic, but difficult term. Who I got to know as Frédéric at the time, and is now more known under the pseudonym Yoginâm. I told you we talked a little bit about that. And he was he's also from Europe originally. He also has lived for also a long time outside of Europe, exposed to different traditions, you could say. To certain transformations, I think he attained a certain state of this more transcendental awareness, you could say. and he had he could also see that this was very much, you know, this absence of that in Western cultures actually creating a lot of problems, you know, creating a lot of the difficulties that we're in. And he really feels that should be, you know, in one way or another brought back as a natural element of life, you know, not in normally integrated, not into indeed these dichotomies that you talk about, right? You know, we have seen this whole, you know, New Age movement in Europe. Okay, you add a little bit of a component in the weekend or work, so this, that, you know, but it's not like a naturally integrated part of human living. And so he took the task upon himself to have this transcendental orientation, to shape that, to find a vocabulary and a kind of shape, a way of bringing it, and a way of practice that could fit very well this people living in a modern Western society. Because he had also seen that the attempt to import traditions from other cultures into our own culture and start practicing that also that doesn't really work that well, because there's so much language and in the, you know, you could say soul connections in this symbolism of the other culture, for which to really to have that function affect it deeply, it basically would have need to been growing up in that culture. So it doesn't really work that well. So I was very, of course, from an anthropological perspective, also very fascinated by that mission that he took upon himself, basically, and so I made him also that the object of my study. So my final thesis, where for the master in anthropology, was also a research about his work in the context of Western cultures. So that is a little bit the background, and I've stayed always very much a long time also connected in a foundation that was supporting his work, you know, and active with some centers that were created, you know, in Belgium and Spain. But then actually, in recent years, with the developments of that we have seen in recent years, the whole dynamic, you know, in the world, and this anthropological interest was again triggered, and so I think that and then the Nâm Academy was kind of within the foundation was established, where we said, which is a platform to have a more this academic approach of thinking about that type of thinking in terms of, you know, the transcendental nature of human living, and how that can practically find its way into human society, you know. So that is what we're doing there, and that's the point, is that when I then look at now at the world, and that's this, I think the main, you know, what is the essence of the problems? One of the essence of the problems is this dualistic thinking that we have very strongly in the West, you know, and this, but it's not just dualistic thinking; it's more also kind of more an existential positioning of yourself as a human being in a kind of dualistic way. This, I think you were alluding to that. I call it this atomistic creature, that is the single small little unit that lives in separation from the world around him, and but also that aspect of spirit that you saw. So I'll hand it back to you on this one. So Yoginam speaks, and he says there's a double illusion of separation. You know, there's one illusion of separation, which is between that. There's a separation between you and the world around you. That is kind of two distinct things, whereas that is a total continuity of each other, and almost the outer world, inner world is kind of a mirror image. It's the same world, you could say. He speaks of I world in that sense. And the other illusion is the distinction between this aspect of you, which is transcendental, which is spiritual, you know, he calls that awareness, and daily living, you know, the practice of daily living, you know. So this is also an integrated whole, you know, spirit, matter, daily living, they fully belong together. So so yeah, that how to overcome, and how do you see this dualistic aspect, you know, in the heritage human thinking, and how to overcome that, you know, because how to transform that element, this is something which is occupying me these days. So
yeah, me too. And I think that, you know, all every generation has always had and will always continue to have the same sort of fundamental elementary struggle to work through, and that can never, I don't think it could ever be known fully 100% in such a way that it could not be understood even better. But it represents, I think, when I hear you speak, I'm thinking about the fundamental challenge of sense perception. You know, like we're born as material beings. We come into this world. We're granted a spectrum of sensory tools, instruments that we should learn to use like any tool. You know, you can use a tool badly if you don't think about how to use your power drill or your hammer. You know, you can make a lot of mistakes. You can do a lot of damage. You could also become overly reliant upon the tools. You could start thinking that the cause of the tool is somehow in and of itself. You know, the senses themselves are useful tools that we're given: the taste, touch, smell, sight, hearing. They're useful tools, but I think oftentimes in an overly materialistic world, we tend to make the mistake of believing that the truth is somehow located in some combination of data which we get from those senses, and which we can then, as you pointed out with your problem that you encountered in psychology, we're told that we have to be able to measure everything if we want to treat it as though it is real, you know. And by measure, it involves, you know, functions of sight, the weight, the height, the electric pulse, the something that can be put on a Cartesian graph, charted, and then treated as a data set that we then adduce what is the cause of whatever it is that we're measuring. Now, the problem is, you know, if a materialist might say, well, thus joy is simply the chemical excretion of the brain that might have certain synaptic effects at this part of the brain. And let's say, you know, a hallucinogenic drug can be found that could induce the brain to have that sort of set of chemical excretions and electric impulses at that right spot. Maybe joy is simply the effect of a drug. Maybe because the drug is acting on the physical part of the brain, doing that thing that happens with joy. And so they could say, well, maybe if we could just give everybody drugs every day, they will just be a happy people. And doesn't matter what happens to them in the world that they're living in. Doesn't matter the quality of injustice, of ugliness that they're put into. They'll be happy. They might say that. Now that would be a mistake, because they're this person, this hypothetical person who I'm sure doesn't exist in the world.
Possible.
I mean, this hypothetical person, yeah, they would be ignoring the fact that no, maybe joy actually came from that physical expression within the brain that you were measuring might have come from something completely immaterial and metaphysical that might have touched on something like a love of charity, a love of goodness, a discovery process, a self and outer discovery.
Yeah.
The joy of loving your fellow human beings and telling a joke, and just having that. These are very immaterial spiritual experiences, which can't be properly charted. So I mean, the senses perceive things from the standpoint of opposites. You know, like there's an up, there's a down. I could see it. You know, I could see a dark, I could see a light. You know, maybe taste is a little bit more difficult. Like, what's the opposite of salty? You know, that's a bit more difficult to find the opposites. Sweet, maybe, I don't even know, but they kind of work together. Yeah. But I think I personally was very influenced by the works of Plato and of Saint Augustine.
Yeah.
And I really liked how both of those two philosophers treated the question of dualism of the senses in a very interesting way. Augustine was formerly a Manichaean, right? He had come from the Manichaean world, or the Manichaean sect, that presumed an equal power to darkness and evil as there was to goodness and light. And that was a presumption of the Manichaeans. Now, he had to go through a series of discoveries in his own life to realize that, well, actually, if you really think about it, darkness seems to only be something which tends to occur with the absence of light. It's not something like you could take a candle and bring it into a dark room and find that that candle which emits light can eliminate the darkness, but you can't take any amount of similar darkness into a room full of candles and find that that darkness has any power to eliminate the light of the candles. So in the same sense, the thing we see as darkness is really us, like on the earth, you've got the side of the earth which has a shadow cast because it isn't facing the sun. It is the absence of. And so in the same sense, you could say, well, animals don't seem to do evil. Animals do things that we might, like, I don't put a lion into jail for having killed a baby antelope. I don't do that. That's absurd. Why would anybody do that? But if you see a human being that kills another baby human, all of a sudden, well, it's very understandable why that person should face some legal repercussions, at least, for doing that. Well, then you're like, well, why? Why are we using these two? Isn't that a double standard? If we're just animals, if we're just these Darwinian creatures that emerged gradualistically from other forms of monkeys, and there's no qualitative difference, why are we not putting lions in jail? And it's maybe because the animals don't have access to a moral conscience, a sense of imagining right and wrong, a sense of being able to expand your sense of being to the other and to organize yourself in such, like, if the lion stopped eating lambs, they would starve to death very quickly, or not lambs, but antelope or whatever their natural prey is. Human beings, we don't necessarily need to do certain things the same way that monkeys do them. We can create forms of technology, new forms of discoveries that involve us living a better life, using less effort individually to create more abundance. That also involves tapping into our basic spiritual place of, as you pointed out, awareness and daily living. Like we can unite these things so that we live practically in such a way that an element of our deeper universal being moves through all of our daily actions. We could love others in a way which is maybe going to be different amplitudes, but we could always care about others. We could always think about the consequence of our actions onto others. We could always put ourselves into other people's shoes and feel what they feel on a daily experience. And I think as soon as you do that, no amount of sensory empiricist data can account for how that happens. It's intelligible, but the idea of evil is something which is specifically caused by human beings, not by any other form of animal. Evil it's not built into the universe as such. Right. Evil is something which one has to redefine as not being an equal to the good, but rather it's something that happens when we abide or we feed something within ourselves which is in defiance of our own goodness, of our own natural being, that hurts ourselves, as Plato proved in his dialogues, that every time somebody does something which is in defiance to natural law, and like nobody wakes up saying, I'm going to do evil today, but there's a misjudgment of certain thoughts that you mislabeled good, that are actually not good, that you adopted and internalized, which then feeds your passions and identity, that shapes your choices that you make, which is in defiance of your true essence as a being of goodness and of light and of divinity, that hurts you on some level, even though you're not necessarily consciously aware of it all the time. Some people might be. And from that standpoint, Augustine or Plato would say, well, evil would simply be the absence of the good. It's not a counterbalance of the good. Right. So it's a rich philosophical line of thinking, but it's not one which is very well entertained today, which is, I think today we're much more captured by a Manichaean structure that has different flavors to it.
Yeah, Plato is was for me at that time a wonderful discovery in the thing. I thought, okay, at some point one has to check out what this Plato is about. And I thought, okay, let's see what kind of philosophical, systematic thinking I'm going to find here. And the first I started reading, I think the Symposium was the first one that I picked up, and I was just amazed by the inspiration, no, and the beauty, and how in a very subtle way, basically how he presents this, he's already able to touch upon the, let's say, the spiritual aspects of what you are as a human being. So it's very it's also no wonder that manages to survive so long. I think such work survives so long and continue to have meaning and value. It means it touches upon something more eternal about us, right? That is already says demonstrates that. Just I think you were alluding a few times, and I think it's an important aspect to kind of also for people, as in the terms of self-awareness of our environment of today. Because one thing I guess what you learn in anthropology is that you take for granted your own world, basically cultural world, social world, as if it's just universal and that's just the way it is. And then I was always one anthropologist that I used very much for my research was a French anthropologist, Louis Dumont. And he said the task of the anthropologist is to look at ourselves in perspective, to kind of have I bring up just because he also defined ideology. He studied human culture on the level of ideologies, and ideology these days is a bit of a negative term or something. You can say it is ideological.
Loaded word.
But he defined it simply: ideology is a configuration of ideas and dominating ideas and values in a certain cultural space. Let's say that is what an ideology is, and a configuration of ideas and values, and that is just an objective, more neutral way of bringing it. But I think that what you're alluding to is this material aspect. This that we are very much, I think, going through a period where this materialistic, maybe this mechanistic materialist ideology, this way of looking at the world purely in materialistic terms, is of course very strong, very very dominating, and also becoming stronger. And I think what I would say is how this developed. Let's say at some point, in the West, there was this the atheist secularist drive, right? And there was this aspect of this idea that the God and Nietzsche like saying the God died. It's a bit, it became something that apparently could kind of die or could kind of be discarded. And what Yoginam always says is, in that process of development, he said we threw away the baby with the bathwater, because there were maybe reasons or motivations that God was image was not practical or useful anymore, at least not in the way it manifested. I guess I was not there, but by discarding that, we also discarded this very daily living, this transcendental awareness, to be able to orientation to a transcendental nature of living. And so that disappeared with that. But I think if you look at then a Western thinking, there was this you have spirit matter, and already, although these are, I think they also talk about that they are fully integrated aspects, they belong together in a sense. But when in a Western thinking, when these become treated as two separate kind of aspects, then at some point also, apparently one of them can just disappear, and so spirit that just disappears, and we have only matter left. And now we think, and then it becomes all on. And now we only have matter through which to make our world meaningful, through which to understand our world. And then also, I think for somebody that is in that ideology, in that spectrum, I think also that that's also all there is for the person, and then something which would be more a matter of the spirit, more transcendental, Yeah, it becomes more, yeah, that's just this imaginary thing probably, you know. It's like
Yeah.
or I don't know what. And I think this is very much what has been happening. And I think what, yeah, this orientation of matter, also it speaks the language of limitation. No, then you also said, okay, then you, oh, then the life is also then limited, and and I think that I have the feeling that that is driving, yeah, our thinking very much right now. And yeah, it is also not very much, I think it is not a very, you know, this pro-life vision you don't get from that. No, it is, everything is kind of measured in terms of a materialistic universe. If you don't have this dualism between spirit and matter, that divorce between these two elements can never take place, you know. It is I like to use the term, you have dualism, but I like to also use the term monism, you know, in a sense of if you say, okay, you can position yourself dualistically, you know, as a kind of, oh, I'm a kind of in a separated from something else, and it's kind of a limited creature, and outside there's nothing. Or you can position more yourself existentially monistically, which is you are aware that you are sharing in something bigger than you, in a wider whole, in a wider universe that you are sharing in. No, that you are. I think that is the monistic aspect. You know, I don't know if that makes sense to you. That type of word. People like to talk about holism. You know, and that's probably similar. But I feel that the whole idea of holism, there can be still hidden dualism in that aspect. And yeah, I think that if I see, for example, in the thinking of Yoginam, he brings back this monistic element, you know, this monistic experience in the transcendental, you know. Because he says basically, like, you know, all the a spiritual tradition is always a vocabulary and a form through which that transcendental can become made meaningful in life, and get activated in life, you know. And this is what spiritual traditions do. And but then I think when you have a rich religious environment with religious symbolism, which is very much alive, then you easily have the tools there to awaken, you know, that your transcendental experience of living, you know, this transcendence. But how can you do that when you are in a materialistic universe, a kind of secular materialistic universe? So you need to, you know, that is I think a little bit the problem where we are in right now. Yeah, we're kind of locked in that materialistic. And I think the point is that we have to appreciate that when somebody is in that, you know, we can criticize all of the people who are in that type of thinking or in that look at the world like that. But I think when you're in that, and indeed have said, okay, the spirit, you know, that is kind of a marginal aspect of life, is not really really that relevant, because anyway it's kind of vague, or it's kind of otherworldly or whatever. That yeah, for such a person there is also then this only this materialist way of making your world meaningful and understanding your world would feel very natural. But what I see is that it leads to a very, certainly there's a lot of, it leads to very internal contradictions, because the fact remains you are ignoring a large part of, you know, of human experience. So it's kind of a state of ignorance in that sense, let's say, certainly in a spiritual sense. And I think what is also it, and then the way that you look at the human being, you get a different view of the human being. I think I like that. What I saw, I think you are emphasizing that often, like the human being as a productive element. No, so that funny thing about this materialistic view is also, so we have this, then also this consumer society that has been having in the past decades. And so that had grown a view of the human being, that the human being is just a consuming entity, And
Yes.
then you can also, if you say, oh, it's a consuming entity. Now I look at this world of matter. There is a limitation in there, and so
Mhm.
yeah, an extra person coming there as a consuming entity, yeah, it creates into, it leads to problems. You know, all these because the human being is a consuming the energy, and
Yeah.
whereas the idea that you can the idea that the human being is actually a productive unit, you know,
Yeah.
that life goes through the human being into living, right? That we are kind of a
Yeah.
bearer of life. You know, there's this qualification that we are kind of almost naturally going against life. No, life goes through us. You know, we are the product of life. Do you want to say something about that aspect? That
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I think this partially the way I heard you formulating the idea, it reminded me a little bit of one of the ways that pseudo modern neo-Manichaeism has been expressing itself through this idea that there is this that what is primary between existence and non-existence, and there is this is one of the problems of this type of naive dualism, is that non-existence is given the label of essentially something that is equivalent to existence. You're assuming the existence of non-existence, of the so-called vacuum.
yeah,
Now, of course, you can imagine all sorts of things. You know, the human mind, as you pointed out, we are the species that creates ideas, and we generate logical frameworks with root seeds that are ideas, hypotheses about the nature of God, ourselves, right? Anything that then can create corollary branches and thoughts that are implicit in your seed, in your axioms, in your postulates, your core assumptions. So yeah, we're the species of ideas. Other animals don't, you know, you don't hear beavers having debates about the nature of beaver nature, or you know, or how what's a better approach to building a dam, which might maximize the amount of like water flow while at the same time providing the benefit for the beaver habitat. Like those debates don't happen. They're wired to do what they do as beavers. It's built into their nature. They build dams, but they don't build them any way better than they did 5,000 years ago. The qualitative nature is not there, and so the access to those higher ideas is not there so much. Human beings, we can envision things like um, things that don't exist. You know, we can make false hypotheses, and so the idea of the existence of non-existence
mm,
is part of that, where we consume. There's this naive idea that we're to be a good citizen of the modern society, we were told that we have to be good consumers. That then we're told is what then creates innovation, justifies the gears of industry, of production, all that by just going to the shopping malls and being good consumers. And yeah, you get this idea that we're just vacuums, constantly sucking in from the external world. That then naturally, if that's our fun, if that's where we place our emphasis as an identity, well, then that's going to make a smaller and smaller piece of the pie over time, right? We're going to be that's less to go around for everyone else. The more you consume as individual vacuums, you're not the emphasis is not being placed upon creation, because obviously everyone has to consume or else your body withers up. You know, you don't do well without water or food over a long time. So consuming is a part of being in the material world, but at the same time it has to be justified and even um, met with a power of creation which supersedes, which overcomes those limits to our existence, which the physical limits of food production, farmland, whatever technologies we're reliant upon at a certain given moment is going to have certain boundary conditions about what can be produced, how many people can be sustained, at what quality of life expectancy could those people be sustained. That's always going to, there will always be relative boundary conditions based upon the discoveries we have not yet made, and whatever material a relationship we have with the periodic table of elements that might use, you know, one given moment iron, which at an earlier stage in society was not a useful thing. You know, we just
yeah,
didn't discover how to work with iron, so it was just a rock. It wasn't useful. Just like at a certain point, oil was not a useful thing. It was
no,
just black stuff under your ground that if you were a farmer, it would anger you because that would destroy your means of producing food in an oil-rich part of a field. Now, after certain sets of discoveries, which again are immaterial, like where does a discovery exist? You know, I know where my cup exists. I can chart it on a graph. I can weigh it, but I can't weigh a discovery, but it has material effects. And part of that, when you discover the nature that, oh, this black goopy stuff can actually provide a lot of dense energy that when burned can do a lot of work for society. Well, that all of a sudden creates a value where there was no value or negative value in this black stuff, this oil. Does that mean you should always be dependent on it forever? No, you should never do that. You know, you're always obliged to use each platform as the basis to leap into a new set of qualitative discoveries, which will take time, but that's sort of a momentum that comes with, as responsibility, a new power, because a new power to sustain more people at a higher quality of life, which is what you get when you go from, like, let's say a copper society to an iron society. You have all of a sudden a greater power of destruction. You could do more damage with iron weapons than you could with copper weapons. Same thing, you could do more damage with iron with weapons that are being powered by petroleum products. But at the same time, you could do a lot of good. You could build a lot of things that solve problems in a more powerful way than you could when you were ignorant of petroleum, or, you know, name any discovery. But so there's always this moral responsibility that comes with the technological leap that one has made. And if they're not moving together, well, then you run into problems. And I again, back to the Manichaean question. I mean, we can look at the way current society scientifically presumes the fabric of the universe is made up of what? We're told it is what? Dark matter, dark energy, black holes that somehow we presume are in the center of every galaxy. And outside of each galaxy, you have this invisible dark matter. All of these things are, by their nature, beyond investigation. They're entities that we have constructed in order to justify a mathematical model that we're comfortable with, rather than question some of the underlying assumptions that might be wrong embedded within the standard model cosmology or atomic physics, which doesn't account for certain things, like how is it that galaxies can maintain their integrity in a certain, you know, coherent spiral fashion, when the math that we're using presumes that the velocity and mass of them should cause them to normally just all distribute the stars and blow away from the center. But somehow there's an integrity. So we say, oh, well, it's a mixture of a certain type of force emergent from a black hole of sucking into this vacuum of nothing in the center of all galaxies, of this absence sucking into nothingness, basically. And then this other countervailing power of dark matter and dark energy around the galaxies, that somehow we just say the forces are just right, that it can account for how the galaxies are what they are. And I don't have to change my math. I don't have to change my assumptions. I could just hold on to those comfortable safety blankets I've been taught to believe are true, rather than being creative and doing what Socrates and Plato and every fruitful thinker I can know throughout history, which is question my core assumptions, right? Self-examine.
Exactly.
But they don't want to self-examine. There's just a lack of humility, which again is another metaphysical question, like humility and its inverse, pride, are matters of the spirit, of the soul. If you lack, if you haven't exercised that muscle of being humble, with your thoughts, with yourself, your ego might become overweighted, and you'll have a whole distorted set of thoughts, consequently, that you'll build upon yourself, which will disrupt your natural God-given ability to be a creative participant in the unfolding of universal creation, which is what you've always been wired to do. You know, like when you look at a baby, look at small children, they're constantly asking questions like, why this, why that, why? They have no pride, no arrogance. They're just going out in awe into the universe, and just like sucking up languages. It's beautiful, and it's everybody has that embedded within them when we're brought into this place. And unfortunately, when you have false I think habits that are brought in, that are institutionalized into the world, that those beautiful little babies mature into as they become adults, that where those qualities should be enhanced, the way you see with Plato, into adulthood, where you don't lose your childlike humility and awe. You should be able to capture that, but have it coexist with a mature sense of identity, like Christ had said, be as wise as serpents and soft as doves. That's a powerful philosophical statement. He's saying you should know the nature of good and evil. You should know how to navigate the real world, where there are very bad agendas which wield power, which will disrupt the good. That's a fact. You don't want to just believe everybody. Don't just be a naive believer, but you want to also assume the best, that there is this goodness that's ultimately inside of people too, which is the basis of redemption. That's the whole reason why redemption even exists, or why forgiveness carries weight, is because everybody, you have to have faith that ultimately they want deep down inside to be their natural self, to be their goodness. And it works best if you can have a space to forgive, to give them that space to forgive themselves, even if they don't do it, that it always works best that way. So anyway,
one beautiful stuff there. I think what you touch upon is this the knowing. I think there's this current day, there's so much focus on about knowing, and something has to be immediately like true, the truth. And we forget, I think you allude to that, we forget very often that we are still many ways in which we understand our universe are hypotheses, with which we try to make sense of the thing. But it's already, and then they put in models. And if we can't measure it, we put it in a model, and then the model is and it's treated as if it has been measured, and now we know it again. And I think this imagination, I think Yoginam also says that, we beings are, we think we are rational creatures, but actually we are beings of imagination, And when you tap also more into the transcendental aspect of living, then indeed, like it becomes a creative imagination, you can become a creative force in life. And I think, and that aspect about the knowing, if you go, what the ultimate, you say, and the beautiful, there's humility and the humbleness, you go to there's something that is just this ultimate, that is this what traditions always speak about. There's you cannot get around it. Yoginam calls that a red thread. There's just a red thread throughout humanity, and that is the idea that there's this ultimate that we are just part of and exist in, and are being sustained by. And it has always found itself in new kind of language to make that meaningful in living, to make that active. But the point is about that is that it is in itself a kind of unknowable, it's unknowable in an ordinary knowing sense. And I think in this materialist ideology thinking, it is a kind of a problem that it is unknowable, because what can we then then we can basically then just forget about it. If it's unknowable, then just forget about it, because but it's unknowable, but it is active part of living. It is, Yoginam says it's interactive, it is part of your living, and it's not a problem that you cannot know it, let's say. And how to bring back that kind of sense of what is unknowable, and yet it is part of living. And I think it is that when you aren't this ideology where you just leave all that out, you really run into a lot of problems, and you also invoke a lot of internal contradictions. I think that's also the struggle of the current struggle of the materialist ideology, let's say. That is my thesis, actually, that I wanted to share with you, is that the problems with the materialist ideology is that it is, of course, just focuses on just a limited part of life. And then of course you run into all kinds of contradiction and problems, but basically you can't sustain that then, and of course the idea is of the that you then move beyond it because, oh, you know, the hypotheses don't really work out well. But no, you try to kind of stick in it and defend it and say no, and the rest is just wrong information or irrelevant. But I have the feeling that if you look at Western the heritage of Western thinking and science, the way it was all developed, I have the feeling that our own science and philosophical thinking and probably also, you know, spiritual awareness, we are already aware that the universe is just more than that, you know, that there is you know, that we are not living in a dualistic universe where we are optimistic creatures. We already know that we are kind of monistic creatures that are fully integrated in a whole, you know. And there's a lot of that people say, you know, everything is interconnected, but I sometimes want to say, yeah, but interconnected, yeah, but it is not separated in the first place, you know. This is still interconnected. There's no separation in the first place. So I have the feeling that actually our thinking has already matured much more into something wider, and yet still in the way people, in the daily lives of people, or the way we organize our life or society, and so we are still in this paradigm of kind of a materialistic, atomistic, dualistic world. And I think I feel that is kind of, if there is a certain cultural crisis or something in the West, which I feel that there is, I have the feeling it is that, you know, because we always like to say nowadays, you hear people say, follow the science, right? Follow the science. Yeah, let's follow the science. But then we have to step beyond something else because we're already aware that we are, you know, more than that. And that we are this transcendental creatures. And I think that a lot of people now are just also intuitively just aware of that. They know that. And many people, I hear more and more people also just talk about that. Also, analysts, researchers, like starting to kind of refer. Yeah, there is this. There's the spiritual dimension of living, you know, which needs to have its place. There is this transcendence, and so. I feel that awareness is very much there. But then the thing is, yeah, how can you find the sometimes I see people struggling with what kind of language to find for that. Yeah, so like, you know, yeah, it's love, it's all love, you know, sometimes it's all love, or it's still kind of how to make that very concrete. And I think what I saw in the Netherlands, you know, you have this in this development, you have this idea, okay, so freedom of religion, right? So this, yeah, everybody can just believe whatever they want to believe. It's great, it's good. But in a way, it also has a by-effect of marginalizing it in itself, because you say, okay, that's just a private affair that people, you know. But when we start organizing our society and our life, that we just ignore that aspect because that's just private. That you think. I have the feeling also, I don't know how you see that in the there's one kind of, which is very Western, I think, when you in terms of the transcendental, that we tend to very much translate this into something you believe in. I think this is a little bit you know, connected to maybe Western Christianity, like, oh, you believe in that, you know, but it's not necessarily like that, you know. It's not something, you know, that also kind of marginalizes it. Yeah, we have this measurable material universe and it's all that, yeah, and that otherness, that kind of beyond, yeah, that's just something you believe in, and I choose not to believe in, or I choose to believe something else. So do you recognize that aspect? How do you see that? Because it is like if you go to Chinese thinking, you know, like Confucianism or something, where you have the idea of heaven and harmony, which is of course a very different concept of heaven. It's much, or the Tao, for example. Yeah, the Tao that you speak of is not the real Tao. So you don't get this, oh, you believe in. No, it is just something that is there, you know. So it's how do you see this aspect of belief? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, you know, the question of belief, faith, and reason are two things that are they're highly connected. and obviously you can't treat one without the other, I don't think. And if you want to be responsible with the terms used, but obviously, like, how does somebody make a discovery of something that they've never discovered before? Well, they have to believe that there's something to be discovered, right? If you have a scientist who's a nihilist, or they call themselves a scientist, but they don't believe that there is truth to be discovered, because whatever model that they were given, they're happy with that. They were told that that's all there is.
Yeah.
So there's nothing, and because that there's this idea that has permeated modern society really badly, I believe, I think very destructively, is this idea of absolute relativism or randomness.
Yeah.
That at the heart of causation, we have to assume, whether it's in biological mutations that give rise to new species in a Darwinian fit for survival of superior races which grow and mutate out of random chance mutations, a bigger claw that allows them to, thrive where their competitors did not mutate a new claw. It's random. Or whether it's in the very heart of atomic physics that we've been given. We've been given a model that presumes that there is, within every atom, there's a randomized function causing the behavior of electrons and neutrons and protons outside of those things randomly bouncing about, that is intrinsically unknowable by their essence.
Yeah.
That's the problem. I'm not saying that statistical probability theory is not useful. It is useful. These mathematical probability models, it's useful, but you can't treat it as something other than what it is, as far as, or raise it to a higher value than what it deserves and what role it should responsibly be played within a process. Like any sense, all senses are useful, but you don't want to elevate them to become something that they are not. They can't give you the key to causation. That requires that something more than the sum total of our senses be activated to make that type of leap into a discovery, a eureka. So the same thing for I think the everyone has implicit or explicit a metaphysics, I believe. I don't think anybody can exist and wake up in the morning and live out their day without some metaphysics, even if they are a radical positivist and deny intellectually the existence of metaphysics. They still can't live their life avoiding questions of, like, why, or just doing things that require implicitly the existence of a metaphysical reality, right? The very question why implies that. The very language we use that implies isness. This is this. This is emerges from the concept philosophically of being, which is an immutable, like a state of reality that is immutable and beyond the realm of the permeating, changing world of matter, of the becoming, where things are bounded in space and time. The realm of being is the world of Platonic ideas, of this is implicit, intrinsically metaphysical. So for even metaphysicians to live their life without participating in metaphysical assumptions is impossible. You would be a vegetable. You couldn't get out of bed. You couldn't assume that there is such a thing as bed outside of you. So all that to say, the question of faith. What if you want to be a productive person, you have to sort of presume that there's a better part of you that you want, that doesn't exist yet, that you want to bring into being ever more really, in a more perfect way than it is now. You have to. You have to be able to look upon your past and ideally see something in your past that you have been made, that you are better than, because you have improved, you have learned, you have qualitatively become more wise if you have made choices that are satisfying, and you want to ideally be able to think of yourself 10, 20, 30, 40 years in the future and think, okay, is that future me, or maybe even my great grandkids thinking about my life? Am I or my grandkids looking back at me with pride that I made the right decisions, right? That I'm proud of myself? Or is that future me ashamed of myself? That future being that I want to bring into being, or those kids that don't exist yet, are they ashamed of me? Are they thinking, oh my God, my grandfather was such a mess. What a disastrous set of decisions he made, doing XYZ. and so that helps enormously, being able to leap outside of your ego self, out of the flesh, right, and into both your future self, your past self, others that are not even you, and that requires this imagination, right? You have to have faith that all of this exists to even do the exercise properly, so that that faith thing is bounded by reason, but then the reason is also being shaped by faith. So there's a dance. But I think the problem becomes blind faith, when people start telling you just believe without reason, right? That's where I think you start seeing examples of disastrous human beings behaving disastrously throughout history, being manipulated by high priests, being manipulated by their own stupidity, giving support to actions politically that resulted in the unnecessary deaths of millions or billions of innocent lives, including sometimes their own. Because we've all been told to have faith in the authorities, have faith in the high priests, have faith in the experts, have faith, but don't have faith in your own power of reason. You know, don't do that. You're not qualified. So, you know, a lot of the problems of the Christian world, and I think of every culture that I've looked at, has sort of this battle between formalism and spirit.
Right.
Now, this is where the Buddha emerged when he couldn't find. It's a very Christ-like story, right? In a world which he thought he was sort of like cloistered as a young, you know, person from a noble family. He believed that the world naively was this good place. He believed the authorities, and then he went out and he saw the world, and he was like, "Whoa, there's injustice and poverty." And he asked all of the experts, the same way that, you know, Christ asked the leading Pharisees and rabbis, "Why? Like, you know, if we believe in all of these great thoughts, why is this happening?" And he couldn't get any satisfying answers, and recognized that there was an over dependency upon formalism and law to explain things away, but lacking of the love, the real heart that animates that gave original vitality to the laws. And when the heart disappears, and this usually happens when any institution is brought into being, if it can't be renewed by the original loving creative spirit that gave birth to whatever structure, it will come corrupted, encrusted, and it will stagnate and ultimately become the same sort of ugly thing if it cannot be renewed by somebody who walks the walk, you know, like a Saint Augustine or a Paul in the case of the Christian matrix. You need to have like a Paul to renew it. You need to have a Saint Augustine. You need to have a Thomas More or an Erasmus to renew it, a Martin Luther King Jr. And if you don't, they'll always go the same way. And I would imagine that, well, not imagine, but I know that in the case of the Confucian systems as well, they became very encrusted by formalisms, the rites, and they lost the love at different times of Mencius, of Confucius, his teacher. Same thing for the Neoplatonic schools of, you know, there's many cases of corruption of the Platonic schools, which gives Plato a very bad name. And a lot of evil has been done in the name of Plato, just like a lot of evil has been done in the name of Christ or Confucius or any, you know, name anybody who did something and created something great. You'll find that this sort of thing tends to arise, and I think it all happens to be tied to the faith reason relationship and how they dance together or don't dance together.
Yes. It seems like there's these cycles, you know, that it becomes there's more light, it's more enlightened, and it becomes more limited again. And when it becomes more limited again, it opens up again because it's too more enlightened again. Because, you know, the more limited becomes, the more people, I think, realize from within, no, there's something more than this, you know, there's something more than meets this eye, right? So yeah. I very much appreciate to have this exploration of a paradigm of a human being, of a creative human being, you know, the creative spirit of human being with you. And I think it is for this one time to move forward. And I appreciate it very much, Matthew. And
amen, brother. I appreciate this too. This is a very edifying conversation and a nice way to start my day. Yeah, I really appreciate it. I look forward to our next conversation.
It's a very nice. I think there's a lot to unpack there. There's a lot of potential further to unpack. So I really appreciate it, and have a nice day. And
Yes, have a
we'll
nice
meet
day.
again
All right.
in one of the Rising Tide Foundation sessions.
That would be wonderful. Yes, I look forward to chatting more at our weekly events.
Yes, I
All
think
right.
you're free if you want to in this broadcast say something about the Rising Tide. You're free to do it.
Sure. Yeah, I've got 1 minute.
Yes.
So yeah, sure. Rising Tide Foundation is a platform that I created, a nonprofit based upon culture and educational work that I founded with my wife Cynthia Chung, who's a co-author with me at a few news platforms. And we host weekly seminars. I know yourself, you've been involved in some of these every Sunday, as well as we do study sessions of the original writings of people like Johannes Kepler, how Kepler made his discoveries of universal harmonics and the planetary motions, Plato as well, and Leibniz we've been reading. So anyway, these are things that we do all the time. People can go to risingtidefoundation.net. They can also pick up our books on a recasting of universal history and a lot more. So that's risingtidefoundation.net or canadianpatriot.org, which is my other website. Yeah. But yeah, I gotta jump into another interview. Leon, it is such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Matthew.